The cranberry sauce was still being passed around when my brother David decided to destroy me in front of the entire family. "Look at Emma," he said, gesturing toward me with his wine glass. "Still working at that little nonprofit making what, $30,000 a year? Meanwhile, I'm building Peterson Enterprises into a multi-million-dollar empire." Our cousin Jennifer laughed. "David, you're being generous. I heard she got her car repossessed last month." That wasn't true, but I didn't correct her. I'd learned years ago that defending myself only made things worse at family gatherings. Instead, I focused on cutting my turkey into precise, even pieces. "The family failure," Uncle Robert chimed in from across the table. "Remember when she dropped out of business school? We all knew she'd never amount to anything." Mom set down her fork with a sigh. "Emma, honey, maybe it's time to consider David's offer to work in his mailroom. At least then you'd have steady income." David's grin widened. "Actually, I've reconsidered that offer. I can't have family charity cases damaging Peterson Enterprises' reputation. We're going public next year." The table went quiet for a moment, then erupted in congratulations for David. His wife Sarah beamed as she announced their plans to buy a third vacation home with the IPO money. My younger cousin Mike pulled out his phone to show everyone David's recent feature in the local business journal. "David Peterson, from family business to Fortune 500, Mike read aloud. "It says here you started with just family investment money and turned it into a $400 million company. Family investment money that specifically excluded Emma," Aunt Patricia added helpfully, "since she had no business sense." I nodded along with their assessment. They weren't wrong about my financial situation, at least not from their perspective. I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and wore the same 3 business casual outfits in rotation. My job at the Northwest Children's Foundation paid exactly what David had guessed, $32,000 a year. What they didn't know was that I'd chosen this life deliberately. "Emma," David continued, clearly not finished with his public humiliation session, "you're 34 years old. When are you going to stop playing nonprofit princess and get serious about your future?" "She can't even afford to contribute to family gifts anymore," Jennifer added. "Sarah told me Emma said she couldn't chip in for Grandma's birthday cruise." Sarah nodded eagerly. It was embarrassing. Everyone else contributed $500, and Emma said that was more than her monthly grocery budget. It was true. I had said that. Because it was true, I did budget exactly $420 monthly for groceries, buying generic brands and shopping sales. I meal prepped every Sunday and hadn't eaten at a restaurant in 6 months. "The thing is," David said, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who'd never been contradicted, "success leaves clues. Look around this table. Everyone here has built something meaningful with their lives. Well, almost everyone." He gestured broadly at our assembled family. Uncle Robert owned a successful accounting firm. Cousin Jennifer had married a surgeon. Mike was finishing his MBA at Wharton. Even our youngest cousin Lisa was making 6 figures in tech sales at 26. And then there was me. The family disappointment. "You know what your problem is, Emma?" David continued. "You've never learned to think big. You're content with small dreams because you don't have the vision or the drive for real success." "That's not fair," I said quietly. David laughed. "Oh, it's not fair? Emma, you're sitting at a table with people who built their success through hard work and smart decisions. You chose to waste your Stanford MBA on volunteer work. That's not unfair circumstances, that's poor judgment." "She went to Stanford?" Lisa asked, surprised. "Full scholarship," Mom said proudly, then caught herself. "Which makes her current situation even more disappointing." David seized the moment. "Exactly. Emma had every advantage. Top education, family connections, seed money offered from the family investment fund. She turned it all down to follow her passion for helping underprivileged kids." "How noble," Uncle Robert said dryly. "How's that working out for your retirement savings?" I didn't answer because I didn't have retirement savings, at least not in any account they could track. My official 401k through the foundation held exactly $8,000. My checking account typically balanced between $300 and $500. My savings account was empty. "Look, Emma," David said, his tone shifting to what he probably thought was kindness. "I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to help you face reality. You're in your mid-30s with no assets, no retirement plan, no prospects. At some point, you need to accept that your approach isn't working. Maybe she could take some business classes, Sarah suggested. Learn practical skills. It's probably too late for that, David replied. But I suppose it's never too late to start thinking practically about money. Jennifer pulled up something on her phone. I'm looking at Peterson Enterprises' projected growth. David, if you go public at the valuations they're discussing, you'll be worth over $200 million personally. The table buzzed with admiration. David tried to look modest, but I could see him mentally calculating his future Forbes ranking. The key, he said, settling into lecture mode, is understanding leverage. When I started Peterson Enterprises 5 years ago, I identified undervalued manufacturing assets and acquired them with strategic debt financing. Most people think small. They see a struggling factory and worry about the risks. Visionaries see the opportunity. Mike leaned forward eagerly. How did you know which assets to target? Research, David said. Due diligence. I spent months analyzing financial statements, market trends, competitive positioning. You have to understand the numbers before you can make the numbers work for you. I continued eating my turkey while David explained his business philosophy to our captive audience. His description was accurate. He had indeed identified undervalued manufacturing assets and acquired them strategically. What he was leaving out was how he'd financed those acquisitions. The beauty of the leveraged buyout model, David continued, is that you can control assets worth far more than your initial investment. I turned a relatively small amount of family money into a manufacturing empire. How small? Lisa asked. David waved dismissively. The exact numbers aren't important. The point is that with the right vision and execution, you can multiply your returns exponentially. Actually, the exact numbers were very important. David had started Peterson Enterprises with $12 million in initial funding. What he hadn't mentioned was where that $12 million had come from. Emma, Mom said suddenly, you're being very quiet. Don't you have anything to say about David's success? I looked up from my plate. I think it's impressive. That's it. David laughed. Emma, I just explained how I built a $400 million company. The least you could do is ask some questions. Show some interest in learning from success. What would you like me to ask? I don't know, anything. Ask me about market analysis, acquisition strategy, operational efficiency. Ask me how someone could get started building real wealth instead of playing nonprofit volunteer forever. I considered this. Hey. Where did the initial $12 million in funding come from? David's smile faltered slightly. Family investors. People who believed in the vision. Which family investors specifically? Emma, Uncle Robert interrupted, that's not really appropriate dinner conversation. You're right, I said. I apologize. David recovered quickly. It's fine. The funding came from a combination of family office investments and private equity partnerships. Standard startup financing structure. This was technically true but incomplete. The family office investments he was referring to consisted of a single investor, a private investment entity called Cascade Holdings, which had provided the entire $12 million in seed funding that allowed David to purchase his first manufacturing facilities. What David didn't know was that Cascade Holdings was a subsidiary of Meridian Capital Group, which was owned by Pacific Investment Trust, which was controlled by a holding company I'd established during my second year at Stanford. I'd been investing in distressed manufacturing assets since I was 24, using a strategy that David had inadvertently copied when he approached my shell companies for funding. The difference was that I'd been doing it for 10 years, not 5. David's entire business empire was built on my money. The thing about building real wealth, David continued back in his element, is that you need to think generationally. Peterson Enterprises isn't just about my success. It's about building something that will create opportunities for my children and grandchildren. That's so important, Sarah agreed. We want our kids to understand the value of entrepreneurship and investment. Absolutely, Jennifer said. My husband always says the key to generational wealth is compound growth over time. I nodded politely while calculating the actual mathematics of David's generational wealth. If Peterson Enterprises went public at current valuations, David's personal stake would indeed be worth approximately $200 million. However, the company's debt obligations totaled $160 million, all of it borrowed against the original $12 million in equity I'd provided through Cascade Holdings. In simple terms, David's company was worth $200 million, but it owed $160 million to various creditors, with the remaining $40 million representing the actual equity value built on my initial investment. Emma, David said, turning back to me, I want you to really think about what I'm saying. You're watching your family build generational wealth while you're struggling to pay rent. That should be motivating, not demoralizing. It is motivating, I said. Good. So what are you going to do differently? I set down my fork and looked around the table at my family. Uncle Robert, who'd been embezzling from his accounting clients for 3 years. Jennifer, whose surgeon husband was about to lose his medical license for Medicare fraud. Mike, who was financing his Wharton MBA with student loans he'd never be able to repay. Lisa, whose tech sales job would disappear when her company went bankrupt next quarter. They were all so confident in their success, so certain of their financial security. None of them had any idea how precarious their situations actually were. I'm going to make some changes, I said. David beamed. Excellent. What kind of changes? Investment strategy changes. Investment strategy? Uncle Robert laughed. Emma, you need income before you can think about investment strategy. That's true, I agreed. David leaned forward, sensing an opportunity to offer more advice. Look, if you're serious about building wealth, I can introduce you to some people. My investment advisor at Goldman Sachs, for instance. Though you'd need to meet their minimum account requirements first. What are their minimums? Typically $5 million for private wealth management. But they have other services for smaller accounts. I nodded thoughtfully. That's helpful to know. Emma, Mom said gently, maybe start with something more realistic. A basic investment account or a financial advisor who works with people in your income bracket. Mom's right, David said. You need to crawl before you can walk. Build up some savings, then maybe in a few years you can think about more sophisticated strategies. The conversation moved on to other topics. Sarah's plans for redecorating their new vacation home, Mike's internship interviews, Lisa's latest dating drama. I finished my dinner quietly, occasionally offering appropriate responses when directly addressed. After dessert, I helped clear the table and loaded the dishwasher while everyone else gathered in the living room to watch football. When I finished cleaning up, I found my coat and purse. Leaving so early? Mom asked as I came to say goodbye. I have some work to catch up on this weekend, I said. David looked up from the game. Work. Emma, it's Thanksgiving weekend. Even non-profit workers should be able to take a day off. You're right, I said. I just have some phone calls to make. Phone calls? Who works on Thanksgiving weekend? Goldman Sachs, I said. They have weekend hours for private wealth management clients. David laughed. Emma, I think you misunderstood. You can't just call Goldman Sachs. They don't take calls from random people wanting investment advice. Oh, I said. I see. I hugged everyone goodbye and drove home to my modest apartment. Once inside, I poured myself a glass of wine, not expensive wine because I maintained my careful budget even when alone, and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. My weekend work wasn't entirely fictional. I did need to make some phone calls, though they weren't to Goldman Sachs directly. Instead, I opened my encrypted communication app and sent a message to my wealth management team at Meridian Capital Group. Please schedule a call with the Goldman Sachs relationship managers for Peterson Enterprises. I need to discuss some changes to our investment strategy. The response came back within an hour, despite the holiday weekend. When you control over $3 billion in assets across multiple investment vehicles, your wealth management team makes themselves available. Saturday morning, I had coffee with my Goldman Sachs contact, Jonathan Marshall. We met at a quiet cafe in downtown Seattle, away from the main financial district where David might see us. Miss Peterson, Jonathan said, settling into the booth across from me. Thank you for making time this weekend. I understand you want to discuss Peterson Enterprises. I do, I said. I'm considering some portfolio rebalancing. Jonathan pulled out his tablet and accessed the relevant files. As you know, Cascade Holdings currently maintains a $94 million position in Peterson Enterprises across debt and equity instruments. That represents approximately 67% of the company's total capitalization. What would happen if we liquidated that position? Jonathan's eyebrows rose slightly. Immediately, Peterson Enterprises would face a liquidity crisis. They're highly leveraged against the Cascade Holdings credit facilities. Without that backing, they'd be unable to service their existing debt obligations. How quickly would that happen? Within 30 days. They have a balloon payment due to their secondary lenders in December. Without access to the Cascade credit line, they'd default. I sipped my coffee and considered this. David's entire business empire, his upcoming IPO, his plans for generational wealth. All of it depended on continued access to funding from my shell companies. What about the timing of their IPO? They can't go public without resolving the debt structure, Jonathan said. Investment banks won't underwrite an offering with that level of contingent liability. If we pull our backing, the IPO is dead. And David's personal exposure? Jonathan scrolled through more documents. He's personally guaranteed approximately $40 million in corporate debt. If Peterson Enterprises defaults, he'd be liable for those obligations. So he'd lose everything. More than everything. He'd be bankrupt and probably face lawsuits from other investors. I finished my coffee while reviewing the numbers on Jonathan's tablet. David's company, his wealth, his future. All of it existed at my discretion. With a single phone call, I could reduce him from multimillionaire entrepreneur to bankrupt defendant. There's one more thing, Jonathan said. Our legal team wanted me to mention that Mr. Peterson has been making some claims about his funding sources that aren't entirely accurate. What kind of claims? He's been telling potential IPO investors that Peterson Enterprises was built primarily with his own capital and strategic debt financing. He's not disclosing the extent of the Cascade Holdings position. Is that legal? It's a gray area. He's not technically lying, but he's not providing full disclosure either. If investors knew that a single anonymous entity controlled 2/3 of his company, it would significantly impact their valuation. This was interesting information. David wasn't just benefiting from my funding, he was actively concealing it to inflate his own reputation and company valuation. What would you recommend? I asked. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. From a purely financial perspective, Peterson Enterprises has been a solid investment. They're profitable, growing, and well-managed. If you're happy with the returns, there's no compelling reason to liquidate. And from a non-financial perspective? That's not really my area of expertise, Ms. Peterson. Though I will say that Mr. Peterson seems to have no idea who his actual primary investor is. He thinks he's dealing with anonymous institutional money. I thanked Jonathan for his time and drove home to think. David had spent years mocking my financial failures while building his success on my investment capital. He'd humiliated me in front of our family while taking credit for business acumen that was actually funded by my money. The irony was perfect. David's entire critique of my life was based on the assumption that I was financially incompetent, while his own success was completely dependent on my financial competence. That evening I made my decision. Sunday morning I called Jonathan back. Please proceed with liquidating the Peterson Enterprises position. All of it. All of it. I want Cascade Holdings to exercise our rights under the credit agreement and demand immediate repayment of all outstanding obligations. That will trigger the default provisions immediately. I understand. And you want to proceed? Yes. I'll need written authorization for a transaction of this size. You'll have it within the hour. After I hung up, I drafted the authorization letter and sent it through our secure system. By Monday morning, the process would be in motion. David's phone would start ringing with panicked calls from his lawyers, accountants, and potential IPO underwriters. But first, I had one more call to make. I dialed David's personal cell phone. He answered on the second ring. Emma? What's wrong? You never call. Nothing's wrong, I said. I was just thinking about our conversation at Thanksgiving dinner. Oh good. I was hoping my advice would sink in. Have you started looking into investment options? Actually, I took your advice about calling Goldman Sachs. David laughed. Emma, I told you they don't just take random calls from people with no money. I know, I said. But I thought I'd try anyway. And? Well, it turns out they do take calls from some people. Apparently, I qualified for their private wealth management services after all. Emma, that's impossible. Those services require millions in assets. I know, I said. Funny thing about that. There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean, I do have millions in assets, David. Quite a few millions, actually. Emma, that's not funny. Don't joke about things like that. I'm not joking. Another pause, longer this time. Emma, what are you talking about? I'm talking about investment strategy changes, just like I said at dinner. I've decided to liquidate my position in Peterson Enterprises. Your position in Peterson Enterprises? Emma, you don't have a position in Peterson Enterprises. Actually, I do. A pretty substantial one, as it turns out. Emma, you're not making sense. I'm making perfect sense, David. I'm explaining that I own your company. What? Well, not technically own. Control is probably more accurate. Through Cascade Holdings and the associated credit facilities. Cascade Holdings. David's voice trailed off. How do you know about Cascade Holdings? Because I am Cascade Holdings, David. I'm your anonymous investor. I'm the source of the $94 million you've been using to build your manufacturing empire. The line went quiet for nearly 30 seconds. That's impossible, David finally said. Why is it impossible? Because you work at a non-profit for $30,000 a year. $32,000, I corrected. And yes, I do work there. I enjoy the work. Emma, this isn't funny anymore. Stop joking around. I'm not joking, David. I've been investing in distressed manufacturing assets for 10 years. When you approached my shell companies for funding 5 years ago, I thought you showed promise. So I provided the capital. You don't. How is that possible? Stanford MBA, I said. Turns out it was useful after all. But you live in a tiny apartment. You drive a beat-up car. You couldn't afford to contribute to Grandma's birthday gift. I budget very carefully, I said. I find it keeps me grounded. Emma, if this is true, if you actually, why didn't you ever say anything? Why would I? You seemed so proud of building your business empire. I didn't want to diminish your sense of accomplishment. But you let everyone, we've been treating you like a failure? I said. Yes, I noticed. Emma, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known. If you'd known what? That I was wealthy? Would that have changed how you treated me? David was quiet. Because here's the thing, David, I continued. Whether I had money or not, I was still your sister. I was still family. The way you treated me yesterday wasn't about my bank account. It was about your character. Emma, please. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. But you have to understand from my perspective. From your perspective, I was worthless because I was poor. And now that you know I'm not poor, suddenly I matter. That's not. I mean. It's exactly what you mean, David. And that's why I'm making some investment changes. What kind of changes? I'm liquidating my Peterson Enterprises position. All of it. Effective immediately. Emma, no. Please. You can't do that. Why not? It's my money. Because it will destroy everything. The company, the IPO, all of it. I know. Emma, please. I'm begging you. Don't do this. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't. David was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm your brother. You weren't my brother yesterday, David. Yesterday, I was just the family failure who didn't deserve to sit at your table. Emma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't do this. The authorization has already been sent, David. By Monday morning, Cascade Holdings will be demanding immediate repayment of all outstanding obligations. Emma, that will bankrupt me. I'll lose everything. I know. Please. There has to be another way. We can work something out. I'll apologize to everyone. I'll make it right. How? How will you make it right? I don't know. Just tell me what you want. I thought about this. I want you to understand something, David. Money doesn't make someone worthy of respect. Success doesn't make someone valuable. Family should matter more than financial status. You're right. You're absolutely right. But you don't really believe that, do you? If you did, you wouldn't have treated me the way you did yesterday. I believe it now. Because now you know I have money. No. Because I realize I was wrong. Prove it. How? Call a family meeting. Explain to everyone that your business empire was built entirely on my investment capital. Explain that I've been funding your success while you mocked my failures. Explain that the family member you called worthless is actually the source of your wealth. Emma, I can't do that. Why not? Because it would be humiliating. More humiliating than being called a poor failure in front of your entire family? David was quiet. That's what I thought, I said. Goodbye, David. Emma, wait. Please. I hung up. Within an hour my phone started ringing. First David, then Sarah, then Mom, then Uncle Robert. I let them all go to voicemail. By Monday morning, the business world would know that Peterson Enterprises was facing a liquidity crisis. The IPO would be cancelled. David's personal guarantees would be called in. His manufacturing empire would crumble. And I would go back to my job at the Northwest Children's Foundation, where I helped underprivileged kids apply for college scholarships. Because despite what my family believed, some things were more important than money. Though I had to admit the timing was perfect. David's phone had indeed started ringing, just like I'd told Goldman Sachs it would. The difference was that now he knew who was making the calls.